I'd like to acknowledge the events that have taken place and played out in northern British Columbia over the past number of days by stressing that it is my hope and expectation that everyone is focused on working toward a peaceful resolution to the impasse. The RCMP enforcement of the court injunction obtained by Coastal GasLink in Wet'suwet'en Territory during the past few days is indeed an operational issue for the RCMP. However, it's my expectation that the RCMP will conduct themselves with the greatest of care to ensure that those in the territory's rights are respected. It is also my expectation that all individuals will proceed to a peaceful resolution as early as possible. We recognize the right of individuals to protest. We recognize the rights of those across the country who wanted to voice their concerns about this project. However, it has been my view that LNG Canada has shown they understand the importance of consultation and meaningful reconciliation with First Nations, and that's why they have signed agreements with every First Nation along the pipeline corridor. This project represents great opportunity for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples alike, but it also recognizes and highlights the challenges of reconciliation. There's no quick fix to resolving issues that go back to 1876 and beyond. There's no quick fix when it comes to addressing differences of opinion within families, within communities, within clans. 203 bands under the Indian Act in Canada, 13 houses, 5 clans in Wet'suwet'en Territory. Speaks to the challenges that investors have, the challenges that government has, and the challenges, in fact, Indigenous communities have. And that's why Scott Fraser and I visited the office of the Wet'suwet'en in August to talk to Hereditary chiefs about their concerns. We continue to have dialogue on a whole range of issues when it comes to Wet'suwet'en and other communities across the province. Child welfare is the highlight of our successes. There are many others as well. Just before Christmas, we announced a resolution on fish farming in the Broughton Archipelago, a solution that was not expected by anyone, including those that were at the table, yet it was achieved. I'm confident that peaceful resolution can be found. I'm confident that if we keep the doors of dialogue open, we will be able to come through this stronger as a country, stronger as a province, stronger as communities. And with that, I know there are many, many questions, and I'll invite Sheena to manage that.
We'll start with Justine and then Les.
Premier, can you define consent at this point? Has this company met your definition of consent from First Nations for the project?
When the final investment decision was announced in October, after consultation with LNG Canada, it was our conclusion, government's conclusion, that the conditions that we had for LNG proceeding in British Columbia had been met. All nations from wellhead to waterline had signed impact benefit agreements, and we were also, of course, at that time mindful of the challenges at the Unistoten camp. But we were in dialogue and continue to be open for dialogue with Hereditary leadership in that community.
So is there any chance that this opposition could throw a wrench into this project?
It's our view that the process has concluded, but that's not the end of discussion and dialogue. We believe that LNG Canada has met the obligations that we asked them to achieve, and we need to work together. Orders of government, I spoke with the Prime Minister last night about this. He understands, the federal government understands, that British Columbia is unique in Canada. We have unceded territory in every corner of the province. We have court ruling after court ruling that has affirmed we need to find a better way forward. And the old Indian Act management style still exists. And we have to find a way through reconciliation to bring together the various orders of government in Canada, and that's what we intend to do.
Les?
Well, Premier, what sort of interpretation should people put on your Minister Doug Donaldson's visit, excuse me, to the camp just prior to the police action? Was it a courtesy call, or was it an indication of support for their cause? And did he have your approval to make that visit?
Doug is the local representative for the constituency of Stikine, where Wet'suwet'en Territory resides. He was invited, he attended the camp. These are lifetime friends and acquaintances of his. He observed protocols, brought a gift, which is the protocol in the territory. He heard the concerns that were expressed, and he left. This was prior to police action. It was prior to the order of the court being enforced, and I believe it was wholly appropriate. Doug has issued a statement that fully explains his position, why he was there, and I believe if we're going to find a solution, you need to have dialogue. And who better than the local MLA to be there before the RCMP enforced the order to hear one last time what the concerns were.
Vaughn?
Does your definition of free, prior, and informed consent refer to consent by the elected leadership of a First Nation? Does it refer to all First Nations within the region having to unanimously agree? And or does it refer to within a First Nation, such as this one, all houses and clans must agree? What's the actual definition as far as you're concerned?
Well, again, Vaughn, I know that British Columbians and you and others would prefer to have a nice, easy answer to that, what seems to be on the surface a very straightforward question. But I know that Deputy Minister Cull would have done his level best to explain the diverse circumstances we find in British Columbia from community to community. When it comes to the Nisga'a Treaty that was signed outside of the treaty process, but yet it is a treaty. It identifies and acknowledges the nation of the Nisga'a people, but it was not part of the treaty process. Now the treaty process is underway. Some nations chose not to participate in that. The Seychelles signed a reconciliation agreement outside of a treaty process that lays out clearly who deals with who. And the challenge for governments, federal and provincial, is determining how we bring together the historic band council model with, as I understand it, the emerging hereditary model that's very much manifesting itself in Wet'suwet'en territory. So, you know, again, I know people would prefer to have what's the answer, yes or no, but there isn't one. And I know that that all of you here who have been covering these issues for a long, long time understand that every circumstance is different. I use the Broughton Archipelago and the salmon aquaculture issue as an example. We were dealing at that time, nation to nation, with hereditary leadership, with elected leadership, and not everyone in the region agreed, but those who did so enthusiastically, and now we have a way forward. So Chief Bob Chamberlain, who's no shrinking violet, said categorically and unreservedly that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples does not mean a veto. It means we need to sit down and find a way forward on consent. And if this were simple, it would have been done a long, long time ago. I'm very proud of the work we've done in the 17 months we've had the opportunity. Again, the child welfare issues that we talked directly with Wet'suwet'en leadership about in August are a shining example of where we've made progress. Again, a lot of work had been done prior to our arrival, but government needs to grasp these issues and deal with them literally on one-offs. And what's good for the Osoyoos is not necessarily good for West Moberly, and on it goes right across the piece.
The investors, I would think, as much as anyone, that would like to know what it means, since your government has accepted the definition and in fact put it into the directions to all your ministers.
That's right.
So they would like to know what it means, and I think your answer was just that it depends on the circumstances what it means. It must be tough for an investor to
Well,
know
I think sophisticated investors, Vaughn, will know the area in which they want to invest. If it's an industrial activity, it would be a cut block for a forest company, or a mine site, or a tenure for that activity. And so investors are going to look to, who do I have to deal with? Who do I talk to? And they're going to do their level best to meet the needs of people in the community that they want to do business. And I appreciate that. Again, it would be nice to say, well, just go here, talk to those 5 people, and you're good to go. But that's not the experience that we have here in British Columbia, and anyone who's been paying attention knows that.
Dirk?
I was going to ask sort of the same question. We've got municipal government in Victoria, we've got provincial, federal, we've got some Indigenous band councils. Now, many people might be hearing for the first time hereditary band councils. How do you get people to understand what's going on here?
Well, it's the responsibility, and the Prime Minister and I talked about this last night, it's the responsibility of the 2 orders of government to figure that out. And we do that by working in consultation with band councils and hereditary leadership. And the Wet'suwet'en, who brought forward the Delgamuukw case, which was groundbreaking in this regard, are leading the pack in terms of how do we reconcile what's known as the Office of the Wet'suwet'en, which is the elected group, versus the 13 houses and the 5 clans. Again, I would love to be able to say to you that it's really simple, but it's not. And the key is a commitment to resolution. And we want to see peaceful resolution with respect to the court order that's in place. And we want to see prosperity for all British Columbians.
Richard?
What advice are you giving to those who are participating in the blockade, who are breaking the injunction?
I'm not giving any advice to anyone. People are responsible for their actions. I would hope that they would remain peaceful. They have every right to object. That's a fundamental principle in Canada and in British Columbia. I've been at protest lines myself over my checkered career, and many of them on outside on the lawn here prior to my election and even since my election. So we're British Columbians and we will make ourselves known. But I would hope that we would do that in a peaceful manner.
But they are breaking the law, and they can continue to break the law in a peaceful manner, and for that they'll
Well,
be arrested.
no, if they're breaking the law, there are consequences for that, and that's why 14 people were arrested yesterday. Again, you have every right to exercise your dissent, and you have every expectation that you will have to pay the consequences for that.
Okay, we have Mary, and then we're going to end with Keith.
I was just wondering, are you concerned about the optics? Because yesterday there were protests across the country that this is opposition to this project. It's not just here in BC, but it's gathering steam.
Well, you know, I don't want to diminish the significance of the protest yesterday, but they were not uniformly focused on Wet'suwet'en territory. There are no orcas, for example, in Wet'suwet'en territory. There were those that were highlighting that. There were those talking about diluted bitumen. There were those talking about eradicating capitalism. There was a whole bunch of discontent on display for Canadians to see yesterday. And I absolutely respect that. But when it comes to this project, in the North particularly, there are nations that are wildly enthusiastic about the prospects that this opens up for their future. And I think that that needs to be balanced in the coverage of the protests from yesterday.
Last question, Keith.
So you were back to your comment of being on the lawn for protests. You've been on both sides of the fence now. I remember in the 90s you were a senior staffer in the NDP government when they were locked horns with the environmental movement on War of the Woods. Do you see any parallels here? And do you draw any lessons from the NDP's experience in the 90s of dealing with some really sensitive issues?
Well, I certainly take all of these issues to heart. I feel passionately about British Columbia. I feel passionately about the enormous potential we have to see all British Columbians benefit, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, from developing our resources, from ensuring that we continue to perpetuate Indigenous languages, that we have Indigenous housing projects. We have been working relentlessly to try and improve the lives of all British Columbians with a particular focus on reconciliation after many, many generations of ignorance about the plight of Indigenous communities. And I would also argue, I think what's been highlighted by the protests that we saw yesterday and the encampment is that there are laws within Indigenous territories that are not fully understood by all British Columbians. Now, we have to ensure that we are working cooperatively to resolve those two solitudes. But that is part and parcel of the responsibility of all British Columbians and certainly the responsibility of the government. So I take lessons all the time, Keith, from the mistakes that I've made, the mistakes that others have made. And I also like to think that if we work cooperatively, focused on a good outcome for everyone, we're going to get to that.
Okay, we're going to go to phone lines. Les, you don't get extra questions. You're not.
If it's
so
a really
we have
good
someone.
one.
We have someone on the phone line, John Crawford.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is just with regards to the whole hereditary system. I mean, these folks have been camped out there now for 7 years, so it shouldn't, I guess, come as a surprise that we're at this point now. You know, we saw a similar situation about 6 or 7 years ago with Enbridge, where we had an elected leader of the Gitxsan say that he had reached an agreement with Enbridge Northern Gateway regarding that project, and immediately the hereditary chiefs locked the door, told him he was fired, and said that no, this is not going to stand, and indeed it did not. Are we concerned that we've got a tide now that might be heading in the same direction with regards to this project here, with the hereditary chiefs saying no?
Well, again, I met with Hereditary leaders in Wet'suwet'en Territory in August to listen to their concerns, not just about industrial activity, but also about reconciliation with respect to how we conduct relationships between various levels and orders of government in Canada. So I think, again, parallels to the past are fine. Keith Baldry's questions were just about that very thing. The war in the woods, is it comparable to the challenges at the Unistoten camp? And is Enbridge relevant? Is Kinder Morgan relevant? And I would argue that what's relevant is the issue before us. And in this case, it's a natural gas pipeline that has support of 20 of the 20 nations, bands, along the corridor, and impact benefit agreements are in place that include hereditary support. So we have challenges in British Columbia. I'm not denying those, but I think if you approach these with goodwill, I meet with the Leadership Council regularly. We just finished a leadership gathering at the end of November, was it? We're in January, recently, and I'm doing my level best to make sure that I am attuned to the issues in every corner of the province by speaking directly to people, not with much fanfare, not with cameras rolling, but just talking to people to figure out where they're at. And I'm firmly of the view, and I was in October, that this project, the LNG Canada project in Kitimat, will benefit the region and everyone in it.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. That's a wrap.
Should the Prime Minister call with his protest camp, or is it
Sheena told me she's going to punch me if I answer your questions. That's a very good. Well, is that a hereditary question? It would be for the Times columnists. Yeah, we talked about a range of issues. We talk regularly. Thanks, everybody.